What if everything you believed about a hero was a lie? What if the truth he hid for decades could destroy the life of the only person he ever loved? Tonight, you'll hear the secret the general never wanted revealed. A truth buried in burnt files, a face erased from history, and a knock on the door that changed everything. Forever. Stay with me, because once you hear what really happened on Hill 47, you won't be able to forget it. The evening sky hung low over Fu Lam village, pressing against the rooftops as if trying to hide the secrets buried beneath them. A cold wind swept through the narrow dirt path, carrying the scent of damp soil and distant with smoke. Every house seemed quiet, but the silence felt strained, as though the entire village was holding its breath. Inside the smallest house near the old bamboo grove, Lam stood with his hands trembling beside the doorframe. The dim flame of an oil lamp wavered on the table, drawing long shadows across his face. His eyes were swollen from sleepless nights, and his chest rose and fell with the heaviness of a truth he had carried alone for far too long. His mother, Bahoa, sat on the straw mat near the hearth. Her hair was streaked with gray, but it was her eyes that carried the real weight, eyes that had learned to hide fear as a daily habit. She watched Lam with quiet caution, the way a person watches a storm gather on the horizon long before the first thunder is heard. Outside, murmurs drifted from the neighbors who had gathered near the fence. They whispered in tight circles, shifting their feet in the dirt, wondering how a son could do something so unthinkable. Some believed it was madness. Some believed it was evil. A few insisted there must be more to the story. But only Lam and his mother knew what had been brewing inside that house for years. He stepped closer to her, the wooden floor creaking beneath his feet. The sound startled even him, and he felt his heartbeat surge against his ribcage. He remembered the moments that had led him here, the sounds that had shattered peaceful nights, the words that had torn into his childhood like sharp stones. His mother lowered her head, her fingers tightening around the corner of her worn shawl. Her shoulders shook with a quiet exhaustion that had been growing heavier with each passing season. For a moment, neither of them spoke, and the world outside seemed to tilt into stillness. The lantern flickered again, casting a ripple of light across the metal gasoline placed beside the doorway. It stood out like an accusation, like a symbol of something irreversible. The villagers had already seen it, and fear had spread through the settlement like a sudden spark across dry grass. Lam's breath turned unsteady as he stared at the can. He remembered the moment he had picked it up from the shed earlier that day. The decision had not come from anger. It had come from something much deeper, something tangled between love, guilt, and a desperate attempt to end a cycle that no one else understood. His mother lifted her face slowly. Her voice, when it finally broke the silence, was fragile yet filled with a kind of acceptance that chilled him. Her words carried the echo of years filled with sorrow, yet she did not plead and she did not protest. She simply looked at her son with the expression of a woman who had lived long enough to recognize when a story was reaching its breaking point. Outside, the wind pressed against the wooden walls. The villagers leaned closer to the fence, sensing that something was about to unfold. The tension in the air grew heavier, like a storm cloud gathering strength above the rooftops. Lam stepped forward again, his shadow merging with his mother's. The gasoline can remain still and silent beside them, waiting like a witness that had not yet spoken its truth. Inside his heart, a battle raged. He felt a surge of protectiveness, a surge of fear, and a surge of something darker that he could barely name. He knew that a single decision could reshape the future of everyone who lived in that quiet village. His mother closed her eyes. Her hands loosened slightly. The flame of the lantern steadied, illuminating the lines on her tired face. And then a sudden knock at the door shattered the fragile moment, sending both of them into a frozen silence. The knock came again, louder this time, carrying urgency. Voices whispered outside. Footsteps gathered at the threshold. Lam turned toward the door, his pulse rising. The gasoline glinted in the corner of his vision. His mother remained still behind him, waiting for whatever would come next. The truth that would shake the entire village was only a breath away from being revealed. The door handle began to turn. The wooden door shuddered under the force of the knocking, and a tense tremor moved through the small house. Lam felt the air tighten around him as if the walls were slowly closing in. His hand hovered above the latch, but he made no move to open it. He listened instead, measuring the tone of the voices gathered outside. One voice rose above the others, a deep, impatient murmur belonging to Ong Bat, the chief of the village. He was a man whose presence could silence a crowd, and tonight his step sounded heavier than usual, as if he already believed the worst. Behind him came whispers, curious, fearful, almost hungry for answers that no one truly understood. Lamb glanced back at his mother. She sat motionless, her folded hands resting in her lap. Her eyes remained lowered, as though she was preparing herself for the truth to fall upon them both like a heavy stone. The soft glow of the lantern traced the furrows on her face, each line a memory of something she had endured without ever speaking of it. The door rattled again. This time the voice of the village chief carried through the crack between the wooden planks. "Lamb, open the door. We know what you brought into the house today. We need to talk before something irreversible takes place." A wave of heat flushed through Lamb's chest, not from anger, but from the suffocating pressure of being cornered. The entire village stood outside, yet not one of them had seen the truth that had consumed this house for years. They only saw the gasoline can. They only saw the rumor. They only saw the fear. His mother slowly lifted her eyes. For a single moment their gazes met, and Lamb felt something shift inside him. It was as if she had silently handed him a truth he had never fully understood until now. Her expression held neither accusation nor apology, only a tired certainty, as if she knew that the moment unfolded between them was not really about fire, nor about blame, but about the secret they both had been trying to endure. The door handle jerked sharply, breaking his focus. Someone outside was losing patience. Lamb stepped forward instinctively, placing his body between the door and his mother. He had no plan, no words prepared, only a fierce need to protect something that no outsider could comprehend. He reached for the latch, but before he could touch it, a subtle sound rose from behind him. It was not loud enough for the villagers outside to hear, but it froze him in place. It was the soft scraping of something being moved across the floor. He turned slowly. His mother's hand had reached toward the gasoline can, but she had not grasped it. Her fingers merely brushed its metal surface, and her eyes held a quiet determination that unsettled him. There was something in her gaze that he had not seen in years. Something resolute, something final, as if she had made a decision long before anyone knocked on their door. The knocks grew louder. Voices pressed against the wooden panels. The village chief demanded entry. Lamb felt his breath unsteady again. The air around him seemed to ripple with competing forces. The truth was no longer a distant shadow. It stood in the room with them, waiting to reveal itself in the most unforgiving way. His mother spoke at last, her voice low but unwavering. "Lamb, there are things that they will never understand. There are things you have carried that were never yours to hold." He stared at her, unsure what she meant, but unable to look away. She continued, her tone steady yet filled with a depth that reached into him like a forgotten memory, rising from the dark corners of the past. "The night your father disappeared. I know what you saw. I know what you believed. But the truth was not what you think it was." The house seemed to sway with her words. The lantern's flame trembled. The knocking stopped as if the entire village was suddenly listening through the walls. Lamb felt the ground beneath him shift. His mind raced toward a truth he had buried so deeply he had almost convinced himself that it had never existed. His mother's eyes glistened with something he had not expected. Not sorrow, not fear, but a kind of acceptance that frightened him more than all the rumors the villagers whispered. She gently pushed the gasoline can away from her. It rolled slightly, stopping at the foot of the wall with a faint metallic thud, and then she whispered something that made his blood grow cold. "Your father never left the house that night, and neither did the person who came searching for him." Before Lamb could form a single word, the door suddenly swung inward. The village chief stood framed in the doorway with a lantern in his hand, and a crowd gathered behind him. Their eyes widened as they took in the scene. But none of them knew what had just been spoken inside that room. None of them knew the truth that had begun to surface. The truth that would soon shake the entire village in a way no fire ever could. And at that very moment, another figure appeared behind the village chief, stepping into the glow of the lantern's light. A face Lamb never expected to see again. A face that turned every sound in the room into silence. A face that was supposed to have vanished many years ago. The figure opened his mouth, but what he came to say would not be spoken yet. Not tonight. The truth waited on the tip of his tongue, suspended in the air, just out of reach, and the entire village stood breathless, unaware that the real story had only just begun. The doorway glowed with the lantern's orange light, and the villagers stepped back as a mysterious figure moved forward. The crowd parted with a mixture of confusion and disbelief, some whispering to one another, others frozen with wide eyes as if they were witnessing an apparition. Lamb's breath stalled in his chest. His pulse throbbed in his ears as the figure's shadow stretched across the wooden floor. Even the village chief lowered his lantern slightly, unsure whether he was facing a living man or a long-buried ghost. The figure stopped at the threshold. His clothes were weathered, stained with travel, dust, and the scent of rain-soaked earth. His hair had grown longer, darker, and tangled, but his eyes remained unmistakable. Those eyes had once shaped Lamb's childhood. Those eyes had once filled this very house with storm after storm. The figure raised his chin, and the room swallowed a collective breath. It was Lamb's father, but something in his face was different now. There was a shadow of guilt beneath the surface, a heaviness that had not been present years ago. His shoulders slumped with the posture of a man who had walked far from the world he once knew, carrying more than he could bear. He looked at Lamb first, not with anger, not with authority, but with a tired recognition that caused Lamb's chest to tighten. Then the man's gaze shifted to Bahoa. Her eyes did not widen. Her expression did not change. It was as if she had expected this moment, even though she had never spoken a word of it. Silence filled the house, thick and suffocating. The village chief cleared his throat and stepped forward. "We thought you were dead," he said, unable to contain the disbelief straining his voice. "Your wife filed a report herself. Your son witnessed your disappearance. Your tools were found in the forest, your blood on the stones." A murmur swept through the villagers. Several stepped closer, hunger for truth replacing their earlier fear. Lamb's father did not answer the chief. Instead, he turned his full attention back to the son. "You were young that night," he said, his voice low and ragged. "You saw the wrong part of the story. You saw the ending but never the beginning." Lamb felt a chill settle into his bones. His memories of that night had haunted him for years, wrapping around his mind like vines of smoke. Flashes of screaming, running, dark shapes moving through the yard. His mother's trembling hands trying to shield him. His father staggering toward the bamboo grove. He had believed that night ended with violence. He had believed his father vanished forever in the darkness. But now the man stood before him, alive, and the villagers watched as if witnessing the unraveling of an old curse. Bahoa finally rose from her seat. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as though she was stepping back into a story she hoped would never return. "Tell him," she said softly, her eyes fixed on her husband. "Tell him everything before the villagers twist this night into something none of us can escape." Her voice trembled slightly, not from fear of the villagers, but from the weight of the years she had kept hidden between her ribs. Lamb's father stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The lantern light caught the deep scratches on his arm. The villagers gasped, some stepping back again, but none dared leave. The house felt too small for the number of secrets that were gathering inside it. Lamb took a hesitant step forward. His voice emerged unsteady, yet firm enough to slice through the suffocating air. "If you were alive," he said, "why did you never return? Why did you leave us? Why did you leave her?" The man did not answer immediately. His lips tightened, and his throat worked as if his words were trapped inside scar tissue. He opened his mouth, ready to speak, but the old floorboards groaned sharply behind him. Every head turned. A second shadow appeared outside the doorway window, tall and unmoving, a presence that did not belong to any villager, a presence that made Lamb's father stiffen, as if he had been struck. The color drained from his face. He whispered a single sentence that changed the atmosphere in the room entirely. "He followed me here." The lantern flame flickered wildly. The villagers pressed closer, alarm spreading through them like wildfire through dry grass. The shadow outside shifted again, blocking the moonlight. Lamb's father stepped away from the door, his back straightening, his breathing shallow. Bahoa took Lamb's hand with a grip that startled him. Her palm was cold, and her eyes held a fear he had never seen in her before. The village chief moved toward the doorway, lantern lifted high. But before he could open it fully, the entire house fell into a sudden unnatural stillness. The kind of stillness that arrives only when something has crossed a boundary between safety and danger. The villagers shrank back. Some clutched their children. Some whispered prayers beneath their breath. Lamb's father raised a hand, signaling for no one to move. "Whatever stands outside," he said quietly, "is the reason I disappeared. And if it has returned for me, it will not leave without taking something." The shadow at the window shifted once more, this time closer, much closer, and then the sound came, a slow, deliberate breath on the other side of the wooden wall, a breath that did not belong to any human in the village. The lantern flickered again. The window latch slid down by itself, and as the glass trembled, every person inside the house braced for something they were not prepared to face. But the thing outside did not reveal itself. Not yet. It waited just beyond the edge of the light, waiting to enter, waiting to finish what began on the night Lamb thought his father had vanished forever, waiting for the moment no one was ready for, waiting for the truth that would break the village open. And the window slowly began to lift. The window rose with an agonizing slowness, the wooden frame trembling as if resisting an invisible force. Every person inside the room felt the air turn colder, as though something ancient had slipped into the wind and was now pressing against the house. Lamb's father stepped back until his shoulders touched the far wall. His face was drained of all color. He kept his eyes fixed on the widening gap beneath the window, refusing to blink, as if closing his eyes for even a heartbeat would invite something inside. The villagers clung to one another. Their pupils shrank. Even the village chief, a man known for his iron composure, tightened his grip on the lantern until the glass creaked. Lamb stood frozen between his mother and the center of the room. His thoughts swirled in a chaotic storm. Part of him wanted to shield his mother. Part of him wanted to confront whatever was coming. But most of him felt trapped between truths he did not yet understand. The window lifted another inch. The flame of the lantern shivered as if a cold breath passed over it. Then a faint tapping sound echoed from the outside edge of the wooden wall. Gentle, rhythmic, as if someone or something was using a nail to trace patterns into the old timber. Tap, tap, tap. The sound crawled along the wall, moving slowly toward the window. The villagers shifted away from it, pressing to the far corners of the cramped room. Lamb's father whispered through clenched teeth, "Do not look directly at it." But the instruction was too late. The village chief had already leaned forward, bringing the lantern closer to the cracked glass. His lantern light spilled across the outside wall, revealing something none of them expected. Marks, deep claw-like lines, fresh, bleeding fragments of wood dust, still clinging to the edges. The tapping stopped. Silence covered the house like a thick blanket, suffocating, unnatural. Then a low scrape dragged itself across the outer wall, slow and deliberate, as if whatever waited outside was drawing closer to the window, ready to show only what it wanted them to see. Bahoa tightened her hold on Lamb's arm, her nails digging through his sleeve. Her breath trembled, but her eyes were locked on her husband. She spoke without moving her lips much, barely above a whisper. "You brought it back with you." Her husband did not deny it. He lowered his head, eyes full of a grief that made the air heavier. "I could not outrun it," he said. "I never could." The scrape halted. A series of soft thumps began near the base of the wall, slowly climbing upward, as if hands, or something shaped like hands, were pulling themselves toward the window ledge. The thumps reached the wooden sill, then stopped. The village chief lifted his lantern once more, positioning it so the glow touched the rising shadow. A shape stretched across the glass, not fully visible, not clear enough to be named, but unmistakably wrong. Long, slender, moving with a fluidity that no human limb possessed. The villagers recoiled, some covering their mouths to muffle sound, others burying their faces into sleeves. Lamb's heart hammered. His father's eyes filled with dread. His mother whispered a prayer so quietly that only her trembling lips betrayed the words. And then, as if sensing the fear inside the house, the shadow froze. It lingered there, waiting, watching, listening. Lamb's father stepped forward and lifted his hand, signaling for everyone to remain absolutely still. His voice broke the silence in a low, controlled tone. "It is not here for any of you." His gaze slowly shifted to Lamb. "It is here for him." The air burst out of Lamb's lungs, as if someone had punched the breath from his chest. He staggered back, bumping into the old wooden table, sending the oil lamp wobbling dangerously. His mother steadied him, her fingers shaking. "Why him?" she asked, her voice cracking. "You promised me this would never reach the boy." Her husband closed his eyes with visible pain. "I promised something I had no right to promise." The tapping resumed suddenly, louder this time, echoing through the house with an eerie rhythm that seemed to mimic a heartbeat. Tap, tap, tap. The village chief attempted to step forward again, but Lamb's father raised a hand sharply. "Do not move closer. It reacts to fear, sound, and memory." Memory. The word pierced Lamb deeper than anything else. A memory inside him stirred like a creature waking from sleep. Fragments resurfaced. The night his father vanished, his mother's trembling breath, the silhouette near the bamboo grove, and the strange glimmer in the darkness that had burned itself into his childhood. The tapping stopped again, replaced by a soft dragging sound, as if something was sliding downward beneath the window. Lamb's father inhaled deeply, gathering the courage to say the words he had buried for years. "Lamb, the night you thought I disappeared, I did not run from you. I ran from it. You saw the moment it found me, but you did not see what happened afterward. You were too young. Your mother hid you." Lamb felt the back of his throat tighten. Memories flickered again, sharper now. Behind him, the villagers listened in paralyzed silence. The dragging sound grew louder, circling back toward the far side of the house. "Your father did not leave this village by choice," Bahoa said, her voice heavy with sorrow. "He was driven out, marked, chosen for something none of us understood." Her husband nodded slowly. "And now it is chosen again." Another shadow passed across the window, this time bigger, heavier, closer to entering. The village chief reached the door, preparing to lead people outside. But before he could pull it open, a loud crack shook the house, as if something enormous had struck the outer wall. Plaster dust rained from the ceiling. The lantern flame quivered violently. And then, silence again. A silence so deep that even the crickets outside had stopped singing. Every person in the house listened, waiting for the next sound. But nothing came. No tapping, no dragging, no footsteps, no breath. Only a silence so unnatural it wrapped around each soul like cold fingers. The villagers looked at one another, fear rising in their throats. Lamb's father stared at the window with an expression that was neither relief nor terror. It was something worse. Recognition. He whispered one final sentence, and it sank into the room with the weight of an omen. If it has stopped moving, then it has found a way inside. The back of the house released a soft, hollow creak. A creak that did not come from any door, nor any window, but from somewhere much closer, somewhere none of them expected, somewhere already behind them. The hollow creak rose again, deeper this time, vibrating to the floorboards beneath their feet. Every head in the room turned at once, their faces draining of color. The villagers pressed into one another, their breaths catching in their throats as they tried to understand how something could enter a house without using a door or a window. Lamb felt the hairs along his arms rise, as if the air itself had become aware of him. His mother gripped his hand so hard her knuckles whitened. Her breath trembled in uneven shivers, but her gaze remained focused on the darkened corner behind them, the corner where the small storage room stood, a room no one had opened in years. The creak stretched into a slow, groaning sound, as though something heavy was shifting inside the tiny space. The door of the storage room, once sealed by dust and disuse, began to move inward by the thickness of a finger. No one dared to speak. No one dared to step forward. Not even the village chief. Only Lamb's father reacted. But his reaction was a retreat, an instinctive, fearful step backward, as at the very sight of that slow-moving door pulled old wounds open again. His eyes locked on the dark crack forming in the frame. "This is how it begins," he said under his breath. His voice was not loud, but the entire room heard it clearly. The villagers clung to every word. Their fear seemed thick in the air until each inhale felt weighted. The door cracked open wider. Darkness spilled out like ink, swallowing the faint glow of the lanterns. Lamb could see only the edge of an old basket inside, nothing more. Yet the darkness felt deeper than the space should allow. Too deep, too open, as if the room was no longer a room, but an entrance to something vast and hollow. A faint rustling emerged, like fabric brushing against wood. Then a subtle scraping sound followed, the same rhythm they had heard outside the window. Slow, deliberate, patient. Tap, drag, tap. The villagers recoiled as one, the sound seeming to crawl beneath their skin. Bahoa stepped in front of her son, pushing him back with trembling hands. Lamb looked at her face, and for the first time in his life, he saw true terror etched into her features. Not the hidden fear she had worn for years, not the silent dread she carried in the shadows of their home. This was different. This was the fear of something she knew intimately, something she had seen before, something she had kept from him. The scraping grew louder, closer, as if something inside that darkness was moving forward inch by inch. Lamb's father forced himself to step toward the half-open door. His voice cracked as he spoke. It should not be able to end her like this. Not unless... He froze. The scraping ceased abruptly. The dark inside the room seemed to hold its breath. Then from within came a soft knock. A knock that mimicked the exact sound of a human hand tapping gently on wood. A knock that sounded as if someone inside the storage room wished to be let out. Knock, knock, knock. The village chief flinched. Two women stifled their gasps behind their palms. An elderly man whispered prayers under his breath, his face drenched in sweat. Lamb felt the world tilt. Something about that knocking clawed at his deepest memories. The same pattern, the same rhythm, the same quiet calling he remembered from a night his father vanished. The village chief swallowed hard and held up his lantern. "Who is in there?" he demanded, though his voice shook. The knocking paused. A moment of silence passed. Then a voice drifted out from the darkness. A voice so familiar, so haunting, that every limb in Lamb's body turned rigid. "Open the door." It was a child's voice, soft, weak, calling as if from far away. A voice that should not exist in this house. A voice that belonged to someone no one in the room recognized. But it called again, clearer this time. "Open the door. I am cold." The villagers stared at each other, confused and terrified. Lamb's father staggered backward, shaking his head violently. No, it is imitating. Do not be fooled by what it sounds like. It takes voices. It takes memories. It takes... His words cut off as the door creaked wider on its own. The lantern light reached inside at last. A small shape sat in the corner, crouched, still, with his back turned to them. A child's silhouette. The villagers gasped in horrified confusion. But something was wrong. The shape's shoulders moved with an unnatural rhythm, rising and falling too slowly, as if the breathing did not belong to a human chest. Its arms were too long for a child. Its spine curved in a way no living body could bend, and its head hung too far forward, as though it was struggling to hold on to a borrowed form. The childlike voice spoke again. This time, the tone was sharper. "Open the door." It lifted its head slowly. The villagers leaned forward out of instinct, and then immediately stepped back, unable to understand what they were seeing. Lamb's father reached for the door, not to open it, but to slam it shut. However, before his fingers touched the wood, the silhouette twisted its head slightly, not fully, just enough to show the edge of its pale cheek. And then it said something that froze every soul inside the house. "Lamb, I know what you saw the night your father ran." His father went rigid. The villagers looked at Lamb in shock. His mother pulled him closer with a strength fueled by terror. The shape in the darkness shifted again, leaning toward the light. "Come closer," it whispered. "I kept something for you." Lamb's father pushed forward, shouting for the villagers to back away. But before he could seize the door, the small figure in the darkness lifted its hand, and in that hand was an object the villagers recognized immediately. An object Lamb had buried in his memory, his father's old knife. The same knife that had been found near the bamboo grove the night he disappeared. The knife with dried blood still on its edge. The childlike shape held out toward the light. "Do you want to know," it whispered, "whose blood this is?" And as its grip tightened on the handle, the flame of the lantern flickered violently. The door to the storage room snapped fully open, and everything inside the house plunged into darkness. The night was colder than usual, and the silence around the old military house felt heavy, like the shadows themselves were waiting to hear what would happen next. General Harris stood near the window, the dim lamp behind him casting a long shadow across the wooden floor. Daniel entered quietly, the old wooden door making its familiar creak. For the first time in days, the general looked calm. "Sit," he said softly. Daniel obeyed, though his heart thudded like a drum inside his chest. The general took a slow breath, as if gathering the weight of decades. "You've been searching," he said, "for answers I never wanted to give." Daniel didn't respond. He knew the truth was finally coming. The general placed an old leather-bound file on the table. The edges were burned, the cover cracked from years of being hidden away. "This," he said, tapping it gently, "is the real story, not the one written in the reports, not the one the world believes, the one I carried alone." Daniel's breath caught. With trembling fingers, he opened the file. Inside were photographs, faded, grainy, but unmistakably tied to the mission everyone had whispered about for years. A woman's face. A signature that wasn't supposed to exist. A date that changed everything. Daniel stared. "But this means—" "Yes," the general said quietly. "Everything you thought you knew, every truth you believed, was only half the story." Daniel looked up, eyes burning with questions he couldn't form. The general leaned closer, voice barely above a whisper. "And the other half? The one no one ever speaks about." He paused. His eyes glistened with a pain he had buried for years. "That part," he said, "is the reason I disappeared from the battlefield that night." Daniel's heartbeat stopped for a moment. "But now," the general continued, straightening his back as if carrying a final duty, "it's time you know what really happened on Hill 47. Daniel inhaled sharply. "The night you were found," the general said, looking directly into his eyes, "was not an accident. You were never chosen randomly. You were—" And right then, a distant knock echoed through the house. 3 slow knocks, firm, calculated, as if someone knew the exact moment to interrupt. The general froze. Daniel's eyes widened. The lamp flickered. The knocks came again, but heavier, closer. The general turned his head slightly and whispered, "They found us." Darkness swallowed the room.